Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. What is something that your parents did that you swore never to repeat to your own kids? Story 1. I have two, making fun of their interests and hobbies. It's why I don't like showing anyone my artwork. But I will do anything to support my kids and encourage them. If they tell me something in confidence, I'm not using that as a topic of conversation with others. Tell my parents anything and everyone knows. My mom just couldn't understand why I was getting mad when she was telling any Yahoo at Walmart the whole story of events leading up to my divorce. Both are why my mom wonders why I don't tell her anything. I don't want that for my kids. Story 2. Well, I had a stepmother who insisted God was punishing my dad for being mean to her while blood was flowing out of his mouth, eyes, and nose, then refused to drive him to the hospital. That always seemed like something I'd want to avoid. Any friends I would make, she would tell me I couldn't hang out with them because of X reason. She grounded me for 6 months because I forgot to take out one of the trashes. Not that it mattered. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere anyway. There was one time that I had to stand in a corner in my underwear without heat because she heard a noise that woke her up. And obviously, it was me. Once I confessed I could go. I ended up lasting about 18 hours of insisting it wasn't me. Ugly crying in the corner till like 3 a.m. at 8 years old. I had to endure 10 years of that because she kept emptying my dad's bank account every time he got paid so he couldn't afford a divorce lawyer. I hated that woman. Story 3. I was spanked. I thought I'd grow up and spank too because I ended up okay, and thought that's how you correct kids. But then as I got older, I thought back to how I'd deal with other kids who made me mad or wouldn't listen to me. I hit them. It clicked, this wasn't what I needed to do. Story 4. My mom could go on for hours for even small misbehaviors. Somehow, it usually looped around to how I didn't keep my room clean, even though the rest of the house was just as much of a mess or worse. When I need to have a stern or serious discussion with my kids, I force myself to make my point in 5 minutes or less. I've even said stuff like, "Look, this is taking way too long. Just don't do this loud thing again, okay?" I also apologize if I yell as soon as I am emotionally able to after an angry outburst. I don't remember mom ever doing that. Story 5. If I ever outsmarted my mom, it was considered attitude. I get her thought process. She of course had been around longer than a 13-year-old. So, clearly there's nothing I could say to her she didn't already know, and she obviously knows better than me. My mom also never apologized. If it ever became clear she was in the wrong, she'd laugh and say she didn't remember saying that, or I must have had some sort of attitude, and that's why she acted upset. That is not the philosophy I will bring to my kids. It's gonna be a learning experience for the both of us. My dad would get mad at me sometimes, too, and a lot of those times were warranted, and a lot were not. Anytime I proved him wrong, he'd apologize immediately and leave it at that. One time when I was around 15, we were both being dickheads and didn't speak for a night. In retrospect, I was the main dickhead, but he was a close second. He came in the next day and apologized anyway. He told me he was the adult in the situation, and he hadn't been. He hated things being off with us, and he loved me. That is exactly how I hope to be with my kids. Story 6. When I was 15, my dad, an MD, decided to have a meeting with me to discuss my future and make a choice what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a programmer, so bad. I love that shit. So, I said programming, software engineering. He went on for over an hour how that profession is lame, and you'll always be behind the scenes unrecognized. This was back in 2004. How wrong was he? So, I didn't know what to tell him. I remember my cousin, who was a few years older at the time, told me accounting would be a good fit for me if I didn't know what to pick. It would be easy for me, and I'd fly through my degree. So, I remembered that and said, "All right, I'll go into accounting." He literally exploded in my face, yelling and shouting how could I throw my future away. I was scared of him. I never was close to him. He barely spent time with me my entire life. This grown-ass man was never there for me but decided to control my life. I knew what he wanted me to say. I just wanted the yelling and shouting to stop, and I wanted him to calm down. So, I said defiantly, "Okay, I'll be a doctor." He immediately turned around, smiled, happy, and congratulated me. I felt what it's like to have a part of me die that day. I wasted 3 years of life on med school before I was like, fuck this shit, got depressed and asked my sister to help me convince him to transfer over to engineering school. But my life was never the same. And my psyche was changed as well. I easily give up now, more irritable, can't sleep well at all, etc. So, I get what you mean. My kids will choose what they want to be even if it's fucking curling. Story 7. I became my mother's only confidant from a young age, to the point where I was telling her she needed to get a divorce when I was only 14 to 15. I would never put my hypothetical children in a position where I'm emotionally dependent on them in that way. Story 8. If you have no car, no kitchen, no time to cook, and/or no cooking skills, because your parents also had the aforementioned disadvantages, that's the best you'll get that your kid will eat for under $3. Sure, you can make rice and beans with frozen vegetables for cheap, but if you work 2+ jobs and don't have a full kitchen, you're not going to put in the time to force your kid to eat something like that. I taught free cooking nutrition classes for families on food stamps, and the hardest part was getting them to sign up. WIC moms have to take classes, but generally prefer the online ones that take very little time if they have access to them. Once they got into class, I'd say 1 in 6 had some stupid idea about nutrition and wouldn't listen to me, thanks Dr. Oz, and 1 in 3 was happy about the free food, but wasn't interested in putting effort into learning. The other half got a lot out of it, especially since we were trained to tailor our lessons to people with no kitchen, including no refrigerator, people with no transportation, people whose tastes revolved around fast food, people with kids, people with health issues, and people whose only exposure to nutrition was the food claims on the front like fat-free or all-natural. Story 9. I'm 32. When I was 14, my dad shot himself, leaving my mom with 4 kids, 14,123 and 1. 3 years ago, my brother hung himself. He was going to be 18. 1 year ago, my mom committed suicide while I was heavily pregnant with my girl. I couldn't fly to her funeral. I have 2 kids, a 4-year-old and a 10-month-old. This got longer than I was planning to make it. I've learned never say never in regards to parenting, but I never want to put my kids through what my parents put my siblings and I through. Story 10. Not be affectionate. My mom was very distant and not a physically emotional person with me growing up. I realized that if I have kids, I'd want to read to them, hug them, celebrate their accomplishments. Overall, have them feel comfortable with me to share their thoughts or feelings. Edit. Well, was not expecting any of the comments or votes at all. I just post and keep it moving, but you know what? Hugs for all, only if you consent. I enjoyed reading some of the comments so far and will continue. This has been the most affection I've gotten in quarantine, so I hope you're all doing better than I am. Story 11. When I was little, when my dad was doing anything out in the yard, my brother and I would ask if we could help. The answer was always, you can help by staying out of the way. My kids are always allowed to help, and so feel they can contribute, grow a sense of self-worth, and an appreciation of group effort. Story 12. I am told I was a very sensitive kid, and maybe I was, but honestly, with the crap they were saying to me, could anyone really blame me for crying? 90% of the time, if I cried in front of them, it was because of them, and my stepdad would always say that stupid phrase. I like logic, always have, it makes much more sense than things like emotions. So, when he would say that, I only made the mistake of replying once, but I'm already crying because of you giving me something to cry about. I copied speech, grammar, and phrasing from other people around me as a kid, so that's the way my brain chose to phrase my response. Looking back, maybe he thought I was mocking him or something, so yeah, that didn't go over well. I was like 9. Story 13. Physical punishment made me really resent them. My kids are 16, 18, and 20, and they are fucking amazing human beings. And my parents actually bragged to people how we don't use physical punishment. So that feels good. Story 14. I was not allowed to have any friends or date. Also, I had my door taken off at 14 and told I didn't deserve privacy because I slammed it. Guilt tripping, physical and emotional abuse. Edit. I asked to hang a sheet up for privacy AMD. They said I didn't deserve privacy for slamming my door. I had my first ever panic attack that way, and my stepdad told me to stop over-exaggerating. My depression and anxiety was always belittled. I was in a mental hospital and my dad and stepmom came to see me and my stepmom just kept telling me what a horrible person I was and that I was just there to get away from her. Also, my stepdad would call me a slut and punish me for things my brother did. He also molested me on several occasions, and when I told my mom, he convinced her I was lying. He told me my feelings didn't matter. But if my kid ever came forward and said something like that about my spouse, I wouldn't just not believe them and accuse them of lying. Story 15. Put the other parent first. I remember my mom left me and my cousin at Claire's an hour after closing because she had to make sure her husband was fed and settled. I still feel for that Claire's employee that sat with us after closing. Story 16. I am a completely different parent to what I experienced. My parents weren't that bad, but they honestly thought they knew everything and just totally failed to listen. They were also very violent in their punishments. I really believe my kids are here to be better than me. That's my job. I do that by listening to them and letting them make their own choices. Like I always say, I don't care if you end up cleaning toilets, but be the best toilet cleaner you can be and take pride in yourself. The one lesson I have drilled into my kids is that the first step at being good at something is sucking at it. I have worked really hard to give them discipline, the knowledge that they can overcome any challenge if they focus, work hard, and regulate themselves. Story 17. Talking about body issues, dieting and shaming things like stretch marks and cellulite. Took me many years to appreciate my body, got a ton of stretch marks when I was 15 and felt so ashamed. Been on so many diets since then and have tried so many pills. I now have a bad relationship with food, but I've grown so much and am trying really hard. I will not do this to my future kids. Story 18. My parents fought a lot around me and I hated it growing and do not want to subject my kids to that. I remember one time when I was about 8 years old. I was in the car with my parents. They were arguing like always, but being trapped in that metal box with both of them screaming back and forth became too much. We stopped at a red light and I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the car and started running. My mom, who was in the passenger seat, ran out after me, and after he pulled over the car, my dad did as well. They caught up to me and their attitudes completely changed. They promised me they wouldn't fight in front of me again, a promise they broke time and time again until their divorce. I'm hoping I can do a better job of keeping my promise. Story 19. My paternal grandfather left my grandmother when my dad and uncle were kids, then refused to pay child support and completely ignored his own sons, whilst my granny had to work extra hours to get food on the table. What's worse is, my paternal grandfather had a son in his second marriage and spoilt him loads. My dad and uncle, unsurprisingly, have no contact with my paternal grandfather. My dad has been a much better father to me and my sister than his own father was to him. He's a much more decent person than his own father was, and he's done an excellent job of bringing us up, on top of being successful in his field. Even as a young kid, he knew what his father was doing was wrong, and swore to be a better father once he had kids. He's done really well for himself. Story 20. Because I said so. I always have a reason why I ask them to do something. If they ask why, I'll explain. I'll explain my reason, my reasons for my reason, various other factors I considered. I can go on for a while. They know this. The other day, I asked my 7-year-old to do something. She said, "Why does I thought about it for a second?" I asked, "Is because I said so a good enough reason?" She thought about it for a sec and said, "Yeah." For about 3 seconds, I felt like I nailed parenting.